My sister's college tuition was paid in full before she attended a single class. $187,000 over 4 years, private university, room and board included, a car in the campus parking lot, and a credit card for emergencies that my parents described as just in case. When it was my turn, 2 years later, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "We've thought about it, and we think you'll value your education more if you invest in it yourself." I was 17 years old. I did not cry. I did not argue. I said, "Okay." Then I went to my room and started a spreadsheet. For years later, I crossed a stage at the same university my sister had attended. She had dropped out after 3 semesters, and the dean read a name into a microphone that stopped my parents cold in their seats in the 3rd row. Mine. Valedictorian. 4.0 GPA. Full academic honors. Achieved on scholarships, loans, 2 part-time jobs, and a meal plan I had supplemented with a hot plate in my dorm room because I was $19 over budget in November of sophomore year. My parents stood up when they called my name. The whole auditorium stood. I stood at the podium and looked out at 2,000 people and thought about the kitchen table and the spreadsheet, and every month of the 4 years between them. Then I said something in my speech that made my father leave the auditorium. Not in anger. In the specific, private way that men leave rooms when something has gotten past the part of them that knows how to stay composed. What I said was not cruel. It was just true. And the truth in that room, on that day, was louder than anything I had ever said in my life. Before I take you all the way back, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely stays with you. Drop your city and the time in the comments right now. I always love knowing where you're watching from. My name is Priya Nair. I'm 29 years old. I'm a physician assistant in an emergency medicine practice in Durham, North Carolina. I graduated valedictorian from Chapel Hill University 4 years ago, funded entirely by myself, and I have spent the time since building a life that required nothing from the people who decided I should build it alone. This is the story of the kitchen table, the spreadsheet, the podium, and what happened after the auditorium. Let me take you back to Cary, North Carolina. The Nair House on Wicklow Drive, a 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood where the school district was the entire point of the address, where parents competed quietly at school events and openly at dinner parties about their children's trajectories. My father, Rajan Nair, was a senior software engineer at a tech firm in Research Triangle Park. Methodical, precise, a man who approached every decision with the same framework he applied to code. Define the inputs, calculate the outputs, optimize for the most efficient path. My mother, Lakshmi, taught mathematics at the local community college. She was warm in the specific way of people who are generous with everyone except the person closest to them, brilliant with her students, patient with strangers, and in possession of a particular blind spot when it came to her younger daughter. Her younger daughter was Divya. Divya was 3 years older than me, which made her the first and therefore the proof. She was beautiful in the way that photographs well and rooms notice the kind of beauty that is its own credential in certain families, in certain cultures, in certain conversations between mothers at temple events. She was not unintelligent. She was simply uninterested in the things that required sustained, invisible effort. She wanted the credential without the architecture underneath it. My parents, who understood this about her, and loved her anyway, made a calculation that I believe was conscious even if they never said it out loud. Divya would need more support to arrive at the destination they had chosen. I would not. I would figure it out. I always had. This calculation was not malicious. I want to be fair about that. My parents were not bad people. They were people who had watched 2 daughters for 17 years and made a conclusion about which one needed what, and they were not entirely wrong. I did figure it out. The mistake was the assumption that figuring it out alone was the same as not needing help. It isn't. Needing less help than someone else is not the same as needing none. I learned that slowly on a hot plate in a dorm room in November, $19 over budget, eating the same 3 meals I had rotated for 6 weeks. But I am getting ahead of myself. The kitchen table conversation happened in April of my junior year of high school. I had already begun researching colleges. I had a list of 12 organized by program strength, financial aid availability, and the specific research opportunities in biomedical sciences that I had decided at 16 were what I wanted to pursue. I was third in my class academically and would be second by the end of the year. My SAT score was 1520 on the first sitting. I had not asked my parents to pay for tutoring because I knew they had spent $4,800 on Divya's SAT prep, and it had moved her score 11 points. I had bought a $22 prep book from the bookstore clearance shelf and done it myself. My father called me to the kitchen table on a Sunday evening. My mother was there. Divya was at a friend's house. The table had the specific, cleared quality of a surface prepared for a serious conversation. My father said, "We want to talk about college." I said, "Okay." He said, "We've been thinking about the finances. Your sister's education was an investment we made in her future. We've looked at our situation, and we think that for you, the right approach is to pursue scholarships and loans. We think you'll value the education more if you've worked for it." He paused. "You're the kind of person who is capable of that." I looked at my father, then at my mother. My mother was looking at the table. I said, "Okay." I went to my room. I opened my laptop. I built the spreadsheet. I want to describe this spreadsheet because it matters. Not as a symbol, as a document. 14 columns. Scholarship opportunities with eligibility requirements, deadline dates, award amounts, and application status. Federal aid estimates by institution. Expected loan amounts and projected repayment schedules. Part-time job categories available on each campus, with average wage data I had pulled from each university's student employment office website. Monthly budget projections for each school, broken into housing, food, textbooks, transportation, and miscellaneous. A column labeled Gap that showed how much each month I would need to cover from employment versus scholarships versus loans. I was 17 years old, and I built a financial model for my own education because nobody else was going to. I applied to 11 colleges. I wrote 23 scholarship essays over 4 months, mostly on weekends, and after 10 p.m. on school nights when my homework was done. I received 7 scholarship awards. The largest was a merit scholarship from Chapel Hill University, $18,000 per year, renewable based on academic performance, requiring a 3.5 GPA minimum. Combined with federal aid and the loan package I had calculated, it covered 71% of my annual costs. The remaining 29%, approximately $8,200 per year, I would need to earn. I accepted Chapel Hill's offer on a Tuesday in April and emailed the financial aid office the same day to ask about on-campus employment opportunities before orientation. My parents were pleased. Not proud, pleased. There is a difference. Pleased is what you are when a logistical problem has resolved itself satisfactorily. Proud is what you feel when you understand what it cost. Divya went to a private university in Charlotte the same fall I started at Chapel Hill. My parents paid her full freight, $46,000 per year, times 4, plus the car, plus the emergency credit card. They drove her to campus in August with a full carload of furniture and bedding and a mini refrigerator and 3 suitcases of clothes. They drove me to Chapel Hill 2 weeks later with what fit in the back seat. My mother had packed a bag of food, snacks, a few pantry staples, something she said was to get you started. She hugged me at the curb and said, "We're proud of you, Priya." I nodded. I carried my bags to my dorm room alone. My roommate was a girl from Greensboro named Adiz who was studying environmental engineering and had the best organizational system I had ever seen and an absolute refusal to be anything less than direct. On the first night, she looked at my side of the room and said, "What's your plan for food budget?" I told her. She said, "Same. I found a grocery store 2 miles out that's cheaper than the campus store. I have a bike." I said, "Can I borrow it Thursday?" She said, "I'll make a copy of the key." Adiz was my person for 4 years. She still is. The first semester was the hardest. Not academically. Academically, I was exactly where I had expected to be. Hard in the specific way that comes from carrying something heavy while also needing to perform as if you aren't. I worked 12 hours a week in the university's administrative office at $12.50 an hour. I studied from 9 p.m. to midnight most nights after shifts. I ate on a budget I had set at $6.50 per day, which required planning I had not fully accounted for, and which taught me, by the end of October, more about applied mathematics than any single class that semester. November was the $19 month. I had miscalculated a textbook cost, $94 secondhand, which I had not budgeted fully, and my meal plan had run low, and my next paycheck was 6 days out. I had $19 and 6 days. I called no one. Not my parents, not Adiz. She had her own budget, and I was not going to be someone's problem. I went to the grocery store on Adiz's bike and spent $17.43 on rice, dried lentils, 1 onion, a can of tomatoes, and a box of oatmeal. I ate those things for 6 days in 6 different combinations, and I was fine. I was cold and tired and slightly bored of lentils, but I was fine. On the 7th day, my paycheck came. I bought a banana and ate it standing in the parking lot of the campus store, and it was the best thing I had eaten in 2 weeks. I tell you this not for sympathy. I tell you because I want you to understand the texture of the 4 years, the daily, unglamorous arithmetic of building something without a net, so that when I tell you what happened at the end of those 4 years, you understand what it was built from. Divya withdrew from her university at the end of the fall semester of sophomore year. I found out from my mother, who mentioned it on a Sunday call in a tone that suggested she had already processed the information and was presenting it as settled. Divya has decided to take some time. She's going to figure out what she really wants. I said, "Okay." I did not say what I was thinking. I went back to studying for my organic chemistry final, which was in 4 days, and which I scored a 97 on, which I also did not call home to mention. My parents did not reduce the financial support they had provided Divya when she withdrew. They were not going to. That is not who they were. But I noticed that December that the $187,000 they had committed to her education had not resulted in a degree, and the $0 they had committed to mine had so far resulted in a 3.92 GPA and a research assistantship I had been offered for the spring semester because my biochemistry professor had noticed my lab work. I did not say this to anyone. I put it in a document on my laptop titled "Things I Know That I Kept for My Own Accounting, Not for Anyone Else's." Year 2, 3.95 GPA. 2 part-time jobs, the administrative office and a new one at a campus health clinic, where I was doing patient intake at $14 an hour and learning, without having a name for it yet, that the thing I loved was the intersection of medicine and the specific human moment of someone arriving in distress and needing someone competent to meet them there. The research assistantship became a research publication, a co-authored paper on protein interaction patterns that I had contributed to more than my credit line reflected, which is a story for another day. My mother called in November of sophomore year. She said, "Your father and I want to help more. We've been talking, and we feel bad about the financial arrangement." I said, "I'm managing." She said, "We know, but we want to contribute something." I said, Mom, the time to contribute was 2 years ago. I have systems now. I have a budget that works. If you send money, now it disrupts things more than it helps. She was quiet. I said, I'm okay. I promise. She said, I know you are. That's what I'm saying. I said, I know what you're saying. And I'm telling you, I'm fine. She said, you shouldn't have had to be this fine. I said, no, but I am. That was the closest my mother had come to naming what had happened. I held it carefully and did not push on it because I needed to study and also because I was not yet ready to have that conversation all the way through. Year 3, 4.0 GPA. The research publication came out. My biochemistry professor, Dr. Patricia Owens, a small woman with a precise manner and 30 years of publications who had, I came to understand, been quietly advocating for me in faculty meetings since sophomore year, called me into her office and said, have you thought about medical school? I said, PA school. She said, why? I said, timeline and debt load, honestly. I've modeled both, and PA school gets me to the work faster with a manageable repayment structure. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, you know, most students your age don't say, I've modeled both. I said, I've been modeling things since I was 17. She said, I know. I've been watching. She wrote me one of the 3 recommendation letters I needed for PA school. It was, she told me later, the strongest she had written in a decade. Year 4, 4.0, Valedictorian. The selection was announced in March. The dean's office called. I was in the health clinic between patient intakes when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I stepped outside. The assistant dean of academic affairs told me that I had been selected as class valedictorian based on academic achievement and asked if I would give the commencement address. I said yes. I sat back down at the intake desk and stared at the wall for approximately 90 seconds. Then the next patient arrived, and I greeted them and did my job, and thought about the speech for the next 6 weeks at every available moment. I told my parents on a Sunday call. I told them factually the way I told them most things. Here is the information. Receive it how you will. My father said, Valedictorian, that's the top of the class. I said, yes. He said, the whole university? I said, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we'll be there. I said, I know. My mother said, Priya, we're so proud. I said, I know. I did not say, you have been proud of me before when it cost you nothing, and this is what it looks like when I achieve it entirely without you. I thought it. I put it in the Things I Know document. I was saving it for the speech. Let me pause here and ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer in the comments. If your parents had paid your siblings' way through college while you funded your own, and you graduated at the top of your class, would you have said something at the podium? Would you have used the moment to make them understand? Or would you have let the degree speak for itself and kept the rest private? I have asked people this for months. The answers are the most divided of any question I've asked. Tell me yours. I wrote 14 drafts of the speech. The first 12 were about medicine, about research, about the specific kind of care that happens in emergency settings, and what it asks of the people who provide it. They were good speeches. They were not the speech. The 13th draft was the honest one. I wrote it on a Wednesday night in April, alone in my dorm room, with the D's at the library, and I wrote it the way you write something when you stop thinking about the audience and start thinking about what is true. I wrote about the kitchen table. I wrote about the spreadsheet. I wrote about November of sophomore year and the $19 and the lentils and the banana in the parking lot. I wrote about what it means to be told you are capable of something and then handed nothing with which to do it. I wrote about the gap between that kitchen table and this stage, and what had crossed it. I did not name my parents. I want to be precise about this. The speech was not an accusation. It was not a humiliation. It was a testimony, the kind that only makes sense if you say the true things, and let the people in the room apply them however they fit. The 14th draft was the 13th draft, edited for time. 8 minutes. Commencement was on a Saturday in May. The auditorium held 2,000 people. My parents were in the third row. My father in the navy suit he wore to important occasions, my mother in a silk sari she had brought from her mother's house, the one she wore when something mattered enough to reach for the formal. Divya was beside them. She had driven up from Cary, and she was wearing a dress, and she had brought flowers, which I had not expected, and which I appreciated without making it complicated. The dean introduced me. He said the things deans say: academic record, research contributions, first-generation achiever characteristics that applied to some of the story, and not all of it. The auditorium applauded. My parents stood up before anyone else. I stood at the podium. I looked out at 2,000 people. I found my parents in the third row. My father was sitting down now, composed, proud in the way that men are proud when the outcome confirms their understanding of things, watching me the way he had always watched me, with the specific expectation that I would perform correctly. I said, "When I was 17 years old, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that I would value my education more if I invested in it myself." The auditorium was quiet. He was right, I said. I do value it. I value it at exactly $94,000 in loans that I will spend the next 10 years repaying. I value it at 1,200 hours of part-time work over 4 academic years. I value it at 6 days in November of sophomore year, when I had $19 and made it work, which taught me more about problem solving than any single course in this curriculum. I paused. I value it at every hour I spent becoming the person standing at this podium, without a safety net, which is the only reason the fall never came. I paused again. I am not telling you this because I am angry. I am telling you this because somewhere in this auditorium there is a student who funded themselves the same way I did, who worked the overnight shift and ate the same rotation of cheat meals, and never called home to say this is harder than you think because they had decided that figuring it out was the only option available. I want that student to hear this clearly. You did not receive less. You built more. And the distance between those two things is exactly the size of who you have become. I looked out at the room. I was told I would value my education more if I worked for it. I graduate today valedictorian of this class. I suppose they were right. I just want them to know how the math actually worked. I folded my notes. I thanked the faculty, the financial aid office, Dr. Patricia Owens by name, and Adiz, I said, the woman who lent me a bike key and never once asked for it back, and I stepped back from the podium. The auditorium stood up. I found my parents in the third row. My mother was crying. Divya was holding her hand. My father was not in his seat. He was not there for the remainder of the ceremony. I found him afterward in the hallway outside the auditorium's east exit, standing against the wall in his navy suit, arms at his sides, looking at the floor. When he heard me approach, he looked up. His eyes were red. My father, Rajan Nair, senior software engineer, man who approached every decision with a framework and optimized for efficiency, was standing in a hallway crying in the specific, private way of men who have been raised not to do it in front of people. He said, "I didn't know about November." I said, "No." He said, $19. I said, "It was fine. I figured it out." He said, "That's the problem, Priya. You shouldn't have had to figure it out. You should have been able to call us." I looked at him. "You would have helped." He looked at the floor again. "I should have been there, so you never had to ask." We stood in that hallway for a while. My mother found us. She put her arms around me and held on the way she held on when I was small and had hurt myself, fully, without reservation, the way that is different from the proud but careful embraces of public moments. Divya stood a few feet away, with the flowers, and looked at her shoes. My father said, "I made the wrong calculation." I said, "I know." He said, "I was wrong about what it would cost you." I said, "Yes." He said, "Can I ask you something?" I waited. The speech, the math comment at the end, was that for us? I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "It was for the student I described, the one who funded themselves and never called home to say it was hard." A pause. "But yes, it was also for you, because you were going to stand up in there and be proud of the outcome without understanding what produced it. And I needed you to understand what produced it before I let you be proud." My father nodded. He did not say anything else. He didn't need to. Let me tell you what happened after that hallway. My parents drove me to lunch after the ceremony, a restaurant my father had researched and made a reservation at 3 weeks prior. My mother had called ahead and arranged for a small cake. The table had flowers on it, not their doing, the restaurant's, but my mother pointed to them when we sat down and said, "Ranunculus," like the centerpieces. She had been paying attention. I noted this. Lunch was not a resolution. It was a beginning of one. My father asked about PA school, when it started, what the program looked like, what the clinical rotations involved. Real questions, the kind that required him to engage with my actual path, rather than the path he had charted. I answered all of them. My mother asked about Adiz. I told them about the bike and the grocery store and the 4 years of shared budget strategy, and the way Adiz had texted me that morning. "Go get them, VP." My parents laughed. Real laughter. The kind that comes when you have been in the same room with someone's actual life for the first time. Divya said, at the end of lunch, with the directness I had always respected even when it made things complicated, "I should have come to visit you for years, and I never came to your campus once." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Thank you for the flowers." She said, "They're from Trader Joe's." I said, "I know. That's why I like them." That was the most honest conversation, Divya, and I had ever had. It lasted 45 seconds. It was enough. PA school, 2 years, Duke University's physician assistant program, funded by a combination of federal loans and a scholarship from a healthcare foundation that Dr. Owens had nominated me for without telling me. I found out when the award letter arrived and called Dr. Owens and said, "Did you do this?" She said, "I did." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because the work you do should have backing that matches it." I cried on that phone call. First time I had cried about any of this, the whole long stretch of it, since I was 17 at the kitchen table, saying, "Okay." I cried for about 4 minutes. Then I called Adiz, who said, I knew she was going to do that, and then we talked for an hour about nothing important and everything that was. I graduated from PA school in the top 5% of my cohort. I am now 2 years into my practice at an emergency medicine clinic in Durham. I work 4 12-hour shifts per week. I am the person my younger self read about in medical career pamphlets and decided to become the one who meets people in distress and knows what to do. I know what to do because I spent 4 years becoming someone who figures things out without a safety net. That training was free. It was just expensive in other ways. My loans, $94,000 at graduation. Current balance, $61,000. I make my payments every month on time with a spreadsheet I still maintain. The spreadsheet has 17 columns now. I added one for net worth. My parents and I talk every Sunday. My father asks about my cases, general cases, No identifying details, but the clinical texture of the work. He is, I think, trying to understand the thing he almost missed. My mother sends food. Not money, food. Packages of spices, homemade snacks, things she makes and ships to Durham because she cannot be there on Sundays and the food is the next best proxy for presents. I receive them and text her a photo of whatever I cook with what she sent. She saves every photo. She told me this once and then immediately changed the subject, which is how I knew it was true. My father and I had one more real conversation 6 months after commencement, on the phone on a Tuesday evening. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said, the calculation I made. I waited." He said, "I told myself I was teaching you independence, that I was recognizing your capability." He paused. "I think I was also just taking the easier path. You were going to be fine, and so I let myself not have to choose." I said, "Yes." He said, "That wasn't right." I said, "No." He said, "Are we okay?" I thought about the hallway, the red eyes, the navy suit, the man standing against the wall who had finally arrived, late, at the cost of what he had made his daughter carry. "We're working on it," I said. "That's what I can give you." He said, "I'll take it." I said, "I know. Here is what I want to say before I go. There is a story that families tell about capable children. The story goes, she is strong, she can handle it, she will figure it out. This story is told with love. It is also a permission slip. Permission to give less. Permission to ask for less from yourself as a parent in exchange for asking more from the child. Permission to call the outcome of that transaction a lesson about independence when it is, more precisely, a lesson about what happens when you are not given a choice. I am not telling you this story, so you will be angry at parents who love you imperfectly. Mine love me. The kitchen table conversation came from a place that had love in it, even if it also had convenience and calcification, and a framework that didn't have space for the word unfair. I know this. I hold it. What I want you to know is this. Being capable is not the same as not needing. Being told you can handle, it is not the same as being offered a hand. And the person who figured it out alone, who made the spreadsheet at 17 and ate the lentils in November and worked the midnight shift and crossed the stage first, that person did not receive less. They built more. The distance between what you were given and what you achieved is not a gap to be ashamed of. It is the full record of who you are. Own every line of it. Put it in the speech. Say it from the podium. Let the people who handed you nothing watch you hand yourself everything. The math works. I promise you, the math works. My name is Priya Nair. I am 29 years old. I am a physician assistant in Durham, North Carolina. I graduated valedictorian on $0 from my parents and $19 from my own pocket in the hardest month. I was told I would value my education more if I invested in it myself. I valued it at exactly the right amount, and I said so, from the podium, in front of 2,000 people, including the third row. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. If you funded yourself while someone else in your family was handed the same thing for free, drop a comment. Tell me what you built. I read every single one. Share this with the student right now who is making the $19 month work and hasn't told anyone. They need to know the stage is coming. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.